before we get started,
Yeah.
I'm just going to light a smudge because I just want
Yeah.
us to all acknowledge that we're just like, a small number of voices in this ecosystem, and that it's to help us to remember that our responsibility is actually to be mindful of those voices that are not here and that often get silenced, and that the work that we're doing is for the next generations to come. So I just wanted to start us off in a good way.
Thank you. Beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone, to the Canadian History of Social Change podcast, sponsored by Sea Change Magazine and the Government of Canada. Today, we're commemorating the 25th anniversary of National Indigenous Peoples Day with a conversation that we are calling Looking Back, Looking Forward. We're delighted to have a fantastic group of panelists with us today, each an awesome Indigenous leader and changemaker in their own right. Let's start with introductions. I will let them do the honor of introduction. So who would like to start? I'm going to say Sara.
Happy to start us off. So Bojo Ani, I'm Sara Wolfe. I'm the director for the Indigenous Innovation Initiative. I'm Anishinaabe with connections and membership at Brunswick House First Nation in Anishinaabe Aski Territory, Northern Ontario, so just south of the James Bay. And I am living and working currently as a guest and a visitor in the Dish with One Spoon Treaty Territory in Toronto, which is the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Métis, and it's the nation of the Mississaugas of the Credit. So, Bojo, and happy to be here.
Love having you here. Thank you so much. Who's next? Jace?
Good morning, Elisa. Good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Jace Meyer. I'm a Métis woman living in Lekwungen-speaking territories, home of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. I identify as a child of Turtle Island, like a Métis person traditionally, quite a nomadic one. Growing up in a military household, I've moved 33 times from coast to coast to coast.
Wow. I'd love to hear more about that nomadic lifestyle sometime, but that's amazing. Paul, what about you? Your introduction.
I'm going to just say a few words to start in my own carrier language, which is one of the changes that I'm the most excited about is the reclamation of our languages. So I have an urban accent. So any carrier listeners, be gentle with me. Deneza, Tsekeza, Daicho. So I would greet all my respected relatives. Gilam Gilo Sadni, my traditional name is Gilam Gilo. And Paul Lacerte Sadni, my English name is Paul. Sagana Laxiliu in Janyakaktane Keo. I'm a member of the Caribou clan. We're a matrilineal society, and I come from the Carrier territory in north central British Columbia. And Snachalia in John Lekwungen Keo. And like Jace, I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, which is Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. Yeah, super happy to be here. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. And I just wanted to thank again this wonderful panel of truly inspirational Indigenous leaders in their communities and across the country. And I wanted to just say a couple of words about history of social change and why this conversation is so important. We originally started the history of social change because we believe that social change was an important lens from which to examine Canada's unique history. We also felt it was very, very important to truly understand and know our past, every single side of it, whether it's good, bad, and ugly. And we want to also acknowledge our roles in our history, because we do believe that the only way to create a stronger future for ourselves is, you know, and a future that we're proud of is to really know where we come from before we can figure out where we want to go next. So this conversation is particularly significant these days. And so looking back, looking forward, again, I just want to repeat that this particular conversation is with regards to the 25th anniversary of National Indigenous Peoples Day. So we are going to talk about Indigenous change making and social change and what needs to happen, what is happening and what we're proud of and what we're excited about and what needs some more work. So without further ado, we have a bunch of questions. Whether or not we get to all of them is a different story, but I'm just so excited to have all of you discuss them with me and share your thoughts and opinions and all that. So I am going to start with the first question that I just think really gets us moving in the direction that we need to in terms of the theme of looking back, looking forward. So the person we become is largely influenced by where we've come from, whether or not you agree. I think most people would agree that it makes a big, a difference in the person we become. So why don't you have all given us a bit of a short bio of who you are in a sense, but why don't you tell us briefly about your past and how it influenced the person you are today? And anyone who can start. And if not, then I will choose someone again.
Get us warmed up a little bit, and then you'll have a hard time getting us to stop.
All good.
So I've been actually thinking about this just like a lot lately. And when I was 7 years old, my mom invited me to go to her class reunion. And I didn't really know what that meant, but I was 7 and I got to go on a trip with my mom, and how exciting was that going to be? And I was going to the big metropolis of Sault Ste. Marie. And what it was is that it was the first ever reunion for the Shingwak Residential School. And so it was where I got to meet my uncle, really first time in my living memory, and see all of these Indigenous folks that had experienced residential school, and trying in my 7-year-old mind to understand, why there were so much tears at a reunion. It wasn't just like happy to see each other tears, right? There was a lot of tears of memories, and I could just get this sense that there was something different about this kind of a reunion. And it's, I think, where we started the conversations of really understanding and learning, who I was as an Indigenous person and what that meant to be of mixed ancestry and to be an Indigenous person living, in Northern Ontario. And I would say that reunion and that experience as a 7-year-old in my 7-year-old mind is like, it was a really pivotal kind of, starting point. I didn't grow up with the culture because the culture was stripped from my mom. The language was stripped from my mom in her experiences at residential school. And so it was only when I first started working in my first career, which is very different than what I do now, but I starting out as a nurse in the Odawa Friendship Center in Ottawa, that I started to understand and to intentionally reclaim the culture and the teachings and my understanding of what my responsibility and relationship to the community was. And it informed that understanding and my learning of those experiences and the impacts of colonization, as it directly impacted my very own family, started to really inform how I decided to work with the community. And it really solidified this decision that I made, that I needed to be in service to the community. And so I've always spent, the last however long it is, 25 years of my career being in service to the community. I think that's a common thread, is that you'll see in people who work within the whatever ecosystem, whatever sector, Indigenous peoples, and we're often like in service to the community, because it's this deep understanding of our cultural connections and our roots to that responsibility to be part of a collective, and that when you give to the collective, that it gives back to you and how much you can get back from it. And so that's informed everything that I've done. It informed my 20 plus years in healthcare as a nurse and as a midwife. And now those experiences in healthcare as a frontline healthcare provider, like literally being in ceremony with people during the most powerful and important ceremony that we go through, right? When we come through that door from the spirit world into the physical world, and being at that ceremony and being responsible for supporting the safe journey through that passage, and supporting families who are at their most vulnerable in that, has really informed how I've shifted into this economic ecosystem, this innovation ecosystem, to really contextualize this work in the business sector with the real life experiences as they come from the community, and to bring a different perspective to it. So I would say that those are some of the ways that my upbringing and my past have informed how I approach my work.
Thank you. That's great.
My story mirrors Sara's in some really key ways as well, being mixed heritage, Métis. For my grandma, primarily, there was a lot of choices to be made as to whether or not to align with that or distance herself from that. And in her early days, the distancing and aligning herself to the Catholic Church was a survival mechanism that really influenced how I was raised and my mom was raised, or not raised in some cases too. There was a lot of narrative and patterning that wasn't handed down in my family, that my mom, learned through failure, and I learned through witnessing, and, kind of deep commitments to not repeat the past and to self-identify at a very young age as a cycle breaker, really wanting to try and create new narratives for a future family, and a dream of mine to, take care of one young little human one day, and just like wrap them up in love and give them a narrative that, you're precious and sacred, and you really belong here. And I think having a really nomadic past, my family moved a lot, trying to create opportunity for themselves, right from like their origin story through to being raised as a military dependent, where you never know how long you're going to stay in one community. It really shapes who you are. For so many Indigenous folks, connection to a place and being of the land is so key to the epistemology that's really shaken when you move and relocate a minimum of every 4 years, to ask yourself, do you belong to that community? And so like Sara's story, being in service when you arrive and figuring out, how can I help? What can I give? How can I, contribute? Has been a lot of how I've identified. So quite naturally, I ended up into a teaching career, helping others with a really big focus on youth, and making sure that kids found a sense of belonging in the classroom. It was not lost on me from a very young age who was missing in those spaces. I went to a Catholic school in downtown Toronto, and then I moved to Victoria, BC from there. And I remember arriving in Victoria and going, where is everyone? I was the most white presenting person in my former school. There was no people of color, and there certainly wasn't any teachers that reflected my understanding of the world until I think I was in grade 5, when I had my First Nations teacher, Janet Rogers. And I remember meeting her as my teacher and thinking, there's an opportunity for more faces and beliefs to be in the room. And it became really clear to me that I wanted to disrupt education and invite more voices into the space, so that more kids felt just belonging without bounds, and a reflection of who they are at the front of the room. And more than anything, to realize that we don't need one head at the front of the room to create a space where we can really share knowledge and celebrate our gifts. And that could be a reciprocal relationship. And so that led me into the space of teacher training, and really trying to, redefine how we even think about training our educators in order to create more opportunities like that. I really lean on the strength to use my voice from my mom. She gave me a difficult name. So my full name is Jace Lynn, on purpose, so that I would learn to correct people when they named me the wrong way, identify who I am fully, and use my voice to get comfortable being uncomfortable and asking the questions that no one else wants to ask. And that kind of strong woman kind of stubborn, no thing's a problem, everything's an opportunity was handed down to me from my mom, from my grandma. And so my job really in life is just to add a little bit more abundance of love around some of those messaging, but bring them together and share them with my daughter today.
That's beautiful. Paul?
Wow.
I know. Wow. Right.
Yeah, I'm already
wanted
loving this. Yeah.
I wanted to say wow earlier, but I was going to wait till you finished before I did the wow, but I am already like astounded by the eloquence and the beautiful, profound story so far. So Paul, now it's up to you.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And what a great invitation to share a little bit of our source code or our origin story, because it's so reflective of what's happening for our people, and these are real-time pivots, my life included, and it's just such an honor to be together in this circle with you and to hold space. Sara, thank you for bringing the smudge. I virtually smudged, and it really helped to ground me out this morning. I think my story is not too dissimilar in that I was raised in an intergenerational residential school survivor environment, and on the challenging side, how that showed up for me, and in my own traditional territory, the carrier territory in North Central British Columbia, and how that showed up for me in a family context was some of the things that I think, particularly, I mean, a lot of us men and a lot of the women and folks along the gender continuum in our communities really struggle with, which is early childhood traumas, and in our family context, that showed up as violence, and because our home community and our entire traditional territory, the Carrier First Nation, the Highway of Tears runs, literally and figuratively right through the heart of our territory. So from a formative and sort of a challenging perspective, we were really present to that reality as a family, and then juxtaposed right beside that was this fierce commitment to serve our people. First, this fierce commitment to serve our community. And so my mom role modeled volunteerism. And so that was like really embedded as a core value, is to give your time, but to give it every chance you get, to give it for free, and to show love in that way. And for my dad, to pass on our traditional knowledge, but also he showed up in a huge way in the education system as a school board trustee for 30 consecutive years in the days when Indigenous people did not get elected into any public office. And so we'd be sitting around the dinner table and getting socialized about being in service of the community and how to fix a pretty broken education system. I was lucky enough to be, for all intents and purposes, culturally adopted by my uncle, Lacerte, who I call my grandpa. He opened up the first sweat lodge since the equivalent of the pot lodge ban in the entire Carrier Nation. And that was his Escapios, his apprentice. And so I learned at a really young age a number of our ceremonies and our songs, and I got a chance to start fasting at a young age, and that, there's these things in your life that, and this like Sara and Jace, I was thinking about this question. There's things in your life that make you go this way, or there's things in your life that make you go this way. And we're so lucky when we have people in our life that influence us, that make us go this way. And Lacerte was one of those people for me, and the medicine that he planted with me and the tools that he put in my cultural tool belt have made all the difference for me to be able to face the challenges that life inevitably brings, and to find the resilience to just continue to be in the service of our people. And so that's really informed how I show up today. I've spent a lot of my time and career engaged in working to end violence against Indigenous women and children. and to really to end violence against all of us along the gender continuum, and in all its forms, and to take that out and to put the love back in, to take out the dysfunction that was put into the space between us as genders and as generations, and to put the love back in. And so I'm a bit of a proponent of a love revolution, and I love talking about love, and I think that is so much of the desired future state that the three of us, and I know Clint, are working towards, is to just facilitate that pivot. Yeah, so I'm happy to be here to talk about that with you today.
That's so wonderful. I'm so moved by your stories, by just this first question, and we can just end the podcast here. I mean, we can go on for 5 more hours too, but I feel like it's filled me as a storyteller myself, like a journalist. It's filled me up. So I'm done. No, I'm kidding. But I just thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. We'll continue on to the questions, though I feel like we could have taken this off in so many different directions already, just talking about your past and how it influenced who you are. But let's look at it from, when we look back over the past 25 years, I'm using 25 because this is the commemoration of 25 years National Indigenous Peoples Day. Let's start with a positive outlook. What's change, social change and opportunities have you witnessed over these years that makes you hopeful and makes you feel something positive that about where we are and where we're going? So why don't we start with that? That was Sara's influence with that idea for the question, because she has a very good point. Let's start with the positive and the optimism. Who wants to go first with that?
I'll jump on that, but only so I can talk about what hasn't changed.
We're getting to that, believe me. But yes, go for it. Go for it.
My career has been surrounded in youth, and what hasn't changed is just the absolute bright light that they bring into the world, and how perfect they arrive at this place, and the wonderment and their curiosity and the resilience, and that part, I think, is what all of our work is really in service of, is maintaining the protective factors of those things. But it's also where all the answers lie. We talk so much about the future of work and, the world we want to create, but we have exactly what we need right now. And that presencing, youth bring us right into that moment and keep us in those moments. I think that's where all the hope comes from me, is we have everything we need right now. And our babies tell us that every day they're born into this world.
Beautiful.
So youth was totally on my list as well of things to say, but for me, it's like the social change that I see is this deep embrace of our identity and the pride in our identity that it is more permissible now than it was when we were children. We were still really largely told to hide it, to be ashamed of it, but like this has shifted substantially. And not only that, it's, that pride of identity is being instilled in our children in a way that it never was when we were growing up. And we now have adults who have been raised in that, and masses of young adults who've been raised in that. And so the youth are just so critical, because having been raised in the culture, they're now the ones that are teaching us about how to be in this world and how to do things that are grounded in the culture, grounded in the teachings, because that's what they know. And that's what they know to be true. And so they're holding us to account regularly. So we need them more than anything. And I think that's the most exciting thing for me to see is how the youth are shifting things. And, our responsibility as not youth anymore is to listen to them and to support them and to learn from them.
Thank you. Paul, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, two things. One is, I just want to acknowledge just the incredible tenacity of our leaders in bringing forward the big frameworks, the big roadmaps, and the amount of sort of, sweat and blood and tears that had to be laid down in the international arena to bring forward the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, here in Canada to bring forward the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 94 calls to action, and the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, 231 calls for justice. And that is absolutely paving a foundation for hope and for stability in the trajectory that our people are going, and the how-tos. There's so many how-tos, and often people say that these are intractable problems and it's so overwhelming and I don't know what to do, and that's not true anymore, and so that is just such a confidence inspiring, it is absolutely a daily momentum builder for me to reflect on that, and how I see it showing up is in my granddaughter Cedar Bear, and so this is a picture of her. She's 3 now, and she is my vision of our desired future state, and all she wants to do is laugh. So if everybody's sitting even in a neutral space, then she'll start wiggling her butt and she'll be like, wiggle, wiggle, just like that. That it should just be. So I'm trying to spread a wiggle, wiggle revolution too. If everybody's just sitting there, just do that, just wiggle, wiggle. Also, she just sits there, and what she's able to do in the absence of the things that were put on our people in the past, all of this, the suppressive regimes and policies and behaviors and treatments, in the absence of those things, were so awesome, and show up so happy. And so she started also doing voice impressions. So I saw her the other day. She's 3. I saw her the other day and she's like, hey, grandpa. Hey, grandpa. And I'm just like, say hello to my little. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is so good. That's what she cares about. That's what she has to worry about the most, is how much can she make people giggle.
Yeah. But the other kind of big social change that's happened, I think, that really influences this is our digital access, right? And so it's not possible to keep us unconnected anymore. Indigenous peoples have always leveraged, our social networks has been one of our strongest assets. And now with the digital connectivity, the possibility of a wiggle movement led by Paul is more feasible than ever. Or should I say, led by Cedar Bear, right? So this is also, I think, a big, kind of convergence point where we can have movements like Idle No More that can really bring communities together to mobilize in a way that asserts our rights and asserts our culture and our values and our teachings in really strength-based ways, and honor the work of those leaders to develop those really critical frameworks that Paul was speaking to.
Absolutely. I almost don't want to get into the challenges part, because you guys, it's motivating and encouraging to hear the positive stuff and the optimistic stuff. If I would say, if anyone wants to respond to what do you think of the biggest, most pressing challenges at the moment, and we could probably have a whole few-hour conversation on that. But anyone want to jump in about what they think is the most pressing challenge at the moment?
I don't know that there's an answer to that question of the most pressing challenge. We have a holistic worldview, but where I landed on this one is healthy masculinity in our communities, and understanding and living into our warriorship and what it means for Indigenous men in the world today, and the optics, and so I've spent a lot of time in this space and working with Indigenous men who are really hurting, and who are also hurting ourselves, and hurting the people around us, in large part because of unhealed early childhood trauma. But we're also in an environment where patriarchy and gender inequity has also limited, I think, for Indigenous men safe spaces. I'm not saying this right, but yeah, there is an opportunity for so much healing for Indigenous men, and to rediscover what beauty and gentleness and warrior walk looks like in our communities. And yeah, I'm really present to that opportunity for the men in our communities to continue in our healing journey, and yeah, and to be in the movement of recovery and rediscovery. And I think that there's lots to explore in that space for the men in our communities. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's an important one, to kind of echo Paul's frameworks. I've largely worked with women and gender diverse folks, two-spirit folks for most of my career, being a midwife and then now running a gender equality program. So I agree. I think there's not enough dialogue and conversation about men's roles in supporting gender equality and, what the opportunity and the beauty in that is. But the other big one for me, the biggest challenge is how can, we have a climate crisis right now, right? Like, so, fires in the summer that are burning, massive swaths of our entire earth. We have floods happening right now as we speak that are catastrophic. And we have a population of people who have been in relationship with the land for generations, thousands and thousands of generations, who've lived sustainably and in balance with the land. And there's this disconnect between, climate action and how do we bring Indigenous people's voices into that. There's two big challenges. Indigenous voices are not honored and respected. They're not brought to the forefront and they're not heard. And then we have this climate crisis, and the very solution is right there in front of us. And we need to find a way to bring those pieces together.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Jace, I can move on to the next question if you wanted to.
So I think to put some more words to that, I really echo Sarah's thoughts. My thought is that the greatest challenge is a shared challenge. It's not an Indigenous challenge. It's a humanity challenge. And our disconnect from the land and our othering ourselves from the land that happens in the kind of greater narrative that we're sold. We're literally in a moment where we're trying to sell people a metaverse, like a complete disconnect from actual lived reality, to put ourselves into headsets and imagine life on another planet. And we're putting billions watching world leaders, I say with quotation marks around it, spend their money trying to get off of this place, not recognizing that even when they land on Mars, they're still going to be of this place and always connected to the health of Mother Earth and our shared mother. I think the greatest opportunity, to Sarah's point and to Paul's point, is to bring us back to that recognition, and to share that beyond just our Indigenous communities, but all communities. And that is going to bring us together. And maybe it's because I've worked in tech the whole time in my last 10 years of my career, but that connectedness is really critical. Only a quarter of our people have access to the internet, so that opportunity to create movements is still quite limited, mostly to our urban dwelling cousins. And where there is access in those non-urban spots, we're paying upwards of $400 to $600 a month to buy bare minimum levels of internet that wouldn't even allow us to participate in a podcast like this today. So our voices do need to be platformed. That requires internet connectivity in order for that to be disseminated. And those messages are so critical to land outside of our Indigenous communities as well, so that we can build bridges into the epistemologies that really, to Sarah's point, have been keeping us alive since time immemorial. But the world doesn't know how to Google for that. They don't know what it's called. So storytelling is hugely part of the solution to that.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful. Let's talk about entrepreneurship for a second, then we'll get to the next one. So Entrepreneurship. There's been an uptick in Indigenous entrepreneurship, which is it's a good thing, since we do see that entrepreneurship has become synonymous with an empowered, self-sufficient future. But what do you think accounts for that reality, and how do you think that can impact the future for Indigenous people? Or if you want to mention what we can do better to get more people running Indigenous-led businesses, which I don't know. I personally think it's great. So you guys can let me know how you feel about it and what your thoughts are. Anyone?
Meyer?
Yeah, entrepreneurship. It was really critical for me to create a movement around entrepreneurship. I worked for a company that wanted to make commerce better for everyone. And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens by inviting people to the table to co-create that solution. And I didn't see that happening. So I used my voice that my mom gave me to ask the question about how can we ensure that Indigenous people will be prioritized in this solution? We are literally trading on lands that have had traditional trade routes operating for 10,000 years, and we pretend like distribution's a new idea, that international trade is hard. But the oceans connect us, and people have been doing it for a long time. And while they've done that, they've been exchanging knowledge that have kept us thriving. So how do we do that in a world powered by the internet? My thought was that, where those communities aren't connected, if we solve those hardest problems first, that we would deliver a better solution for the rest of the world. So Indigenous people had to be core to the impetus, the start line of where entrepreneurship could go. And the reason that matters is because we haven't been allowed to make money. That has been, taken from us. But when you can operate on the internet and move things outside of your community via the post office, that changes things. And why that's important is that you don't have to leave your community for that opportunity, which has been the only option till this point, and that you can set the worth of your own gifts in the world, and establish that value, and reclaim that value, and build community, so that you don't have to hawk a t-shirt just to sell a t-shirt, but that t-shirt or the proceeds from that t-shirt could go back to the things that matter most to your community. And that was really inspirational to the work that I've done in that space, is to realize that entrepreneurship is, social impact in action. It's just, a more widely accepted term, and a bit of a brand people could use to self-identify with when they didn't see themselves as a business owner or a change maker or a social impact agent. But that was like a bit of an open gateway for people to belong to a bigger community, and feel good about that. And it was an incredible space to be in Indigenous entrepreneurship, because it is such a community. I always say that when Indigenous entrepreneurs go to market, they outperform non-Indigenous entrepreneurs because they are the market. They build the problems and the solutions that people are asking for with people. So we're buying products before they release. We're contributing to the creation of those things, and we're really proud to share the successes of the people next to us. And so it's not a spirit of competition, but collaboration. And I think that leadership in the business space, in the business community, is super needed in the world. And there's so much leadership to be shared amongst our Indigenous entrepreneurs.
Yes. And I actually, someone else want to respond to that because I wanted to touch upon sort of what you just mentioned, which could be the culture-centered approach of Indigenous leadership. So you can either respond to the original question or take that approach and that worldview and how that impacts this, the new, entrepreneurs of the future and our businesses of the future, and how that could make our world quite a different place if we only took more lessons from that approach.
Money is, where the power is. So it's not just around having access to capital, it's having control over what happens to those resources, right? And that's why entrepreneurship, I think, is so important, so critical, and is so transformative for our individual Indigenous peoples, but also for their communities, their families, the nation kind of more broadly. And as we build these enterprises that are thriving, as as Jace says, like, we're the most invested in these businesses. We have the most to lose, and so they're taking off at breakneck because their very survival depends on it. But we're moving and we're shifting from this idea of we're surviving to thriving, as Paul's always saying to us, like, from surviving to thriving. And so as we start thriving, we then have the resources to reinvest back into our families, back into ourselves and our businesses. But most importantly, it's this worldview of how are we giving back to our communities, and how are we creating self-sustaining circular economies? And in terms of integrating the culture into it, everything we do is grounded and based in the culture. Like, almost every Indigenous business owner, Indigenous entrepreneur I have met is really looking at, how do I integrate the knowledge and the teachings? They're not trying to replicate like a Western model and approach. Invariably, they're giving back to the community in some way or another, whether it's through mentorship, whether through, social enterprise kind of traditional models of donating proceeds of their funds, whether it's providing employment opportunities, whether it's just creating products that are grounded in the programs and services. And like, I myself, I'm a midwife, but I would say I'm first and foremost an entrepreneur. I started a midwifery practice called Seventh Generation Midwives, right? It was like, how do we intentionally look at the history, the knowledge, the teachings, and bring them forward for those future generations, for those faces yet to come? And how do we reclaim traditional midwifery practices? Well, I'm not suggesting that we are all birthing on the land. We're still having, we still need access to hospitals and conventional medicine and, Western practices. But how do we contemporize those teachings and those knowledges and those ceremonies and look at healthcare from a holistic view and bring those forward to a contemporary context? Like, there's this teaching around this Anishinaabe teaching, and I think it's a fairly universal Indigenous teaching around when someone's pregnant, the other parent is not supposed to hunt or fish. They're not supposed to take life, because we're supposed to be supporting life, right? This idea that you're not taking life. Well, how do you feed yourself, right? And it's like, well, actually, it means that the whole community is supposed to gather around to support the family, because we're supporting that most sacred gift. Well, in a contemporary context in Toronto, we don't have a lot of people who are hunting and fishing these days anyways, right? And, there's only so many raccoons to go around for everyone. So the idea of, telling, the partner of a pregnant person that they're not supposed to hunt or fish may or may not be relevant to them. But if we can connect it to the culture and use it as an opening and an opportunity to talk about violence in the communities, or how we're having an intentional impact on in supporting this pregnancy as a unit together, not just one person experiencing this, but as a group that are experiencing it, as a family that are experiencing it. And then how do we use these teachings to talk about things like, violence in the community, or, how we're even like eating and drinking, smoking and eating healthy. We're expecting this pregnant person to take on all of these things. How do we bring this, into a family unit so everyone's feeling supported? Everyone's, by the way, getting healthier in the meantime. But it's when you can locate it and ground it within those teachings and within the culture that people start seeing the ways that other teachings can make sense and be contemporized, and then give them that sense of pride in their identity, give them that confidence in who they are, and give them ideas for how to integrate that culture in other things that they do. And so everything that we do is grounded in the culture. And that's why Indigenous enterprises are thriving, is because it does have this motivation, this desire, and this deep rooted responsibility, our understanding of our responsibility to be with the community and to give back to the community. And that that's how we win, and that's how we all thrive, and that's how we all succeed, is by sharing what we have.
That's beautiful. That's it's tremendously profound, and I appreciate that. Paul, did you want to add anything to that?
Just a brief thought, and it's that at the core of at the root of our Indigenous epistemologies is this idea of relationship, that we're all that we're all in relationship, and all of our languages have this core concept. And you hear people when you're coming in and out of ceremony say all my relations, and it's just like, oh, like it's just it's a calling in of this truth, this universal truth that we live between us as people, between us and our territories, our Mother Earth, and between us and the ancestral world. And this explosion in the spirit of entrepreneurship in Indigenous communities is so reflective of the expression of that core of our epistemology of being in relationship. And for all of our invested through Raven Indigenous Capital Partners, all of our invested firms and the folks that participate in our accelerator program, when we ask them what their motivations are, profit consistently comes in at number 5. Huh. Profit consistently comes in at number 5. So it's, lift up my people, make my family proud, show respect to my territories, heal. And so this is again, as Jace and Sara have said, this is also the reason for our success, because of the perfect storm of problems that we're facing as a global society, and people are migrating towards that blended bottom line mentality that I think is showing up at a crucial time. Yeah.
That's great. And that's actually a really good point. I want to touch upon this action for non-Indigenous Canadians. So this question, it's been 13 years since Prime Minister Harper's apology to survivors of residential schools, and 6 years since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report with 94 calls to action. And I'm not sure whether non-Indigenous Canadians fully understand what reconciliation means practically speaking. In other words, like, what should we do? What exactly can we do to, help this process along, the reconciliation? So what would and I know this is a big question for the last, if we don't go beyond one. So what are your calls to action for non-Indigenous Canadians? And I know that, Paul, you have to get off the call probably sooner. So if you want to take that, or if not, we that could have been you said a lot already, but just if you wanted to go for it, go for it.
Just this is, please do not burden our people with being Sherpas of your cultural or reconciliation learning journey. We're 4.8% of the population. There's about 10% of our people across Canada that have achieved a middle class standard of living versus about 60% of the mainstream population. So 10% of the 4.8%. And in that context, people refer to that as being that bandwidth that allows you to think about things other than sort of Maslow tier 1. And so the last thing we need is for people, and I would say that bluntly.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, actually.
Yeah, please don't do that. And ask yourself the question: is the status quo acceptable? And if the status quo is unacceptable, how what are you in Sean Connery's words? What are you prepared to do? Okay, bye.
That's great. Bye. Thank you.
I have 3 things. One is we need to support more creativity in our community. And to do that, we need investment. So, let Indigenous people lead it, but we need to invest in Indigenous entrepreneurship, Indigenous innovation, and Indigenous peoples. The second one I wanted to say is start shifting your power, start understanding where power and privilege lies and start shifting it intentionally, right? So it's not around you fixing it for us. It's around you letting go of the power and letting Indigenous peoples be self-determining for themselves. And then the third thing is to keep showing up, because we have so many people now who are afraid of connecting with us because they're afraid to do it wrong. Have humility, walk in with humility, listen to what the community is telling you that it needs, build those relationships and keep showing up. And that's how you will learn. And that's how you will be supporting the community, much more broadly.
That's great. I love the practical advice you guys are providing. No, seriously, this is what we need to hear. So, Jace, what would you say?
Yeah, I think reconciliation is a buzzword that gets really confusing, and it's really hard to figure out where to start and what is a desired finish. I understand the stress that creates for people that are trying to figure out where they are on the continuum and where they want to go. For me, the answer in that is rooted in education. We will never achieve Indigenous sovereignty. We will never achieve a state of togetherness if colonizers are continuing to create our education systems for all of the people on this shared territory. So for me, Indigenous control over Indigenous education that is shared with non-Indigenous learners who want access to that starts in the classroom. That has multi-generational effects. You know, what we learn as young people is what we teach to our children. And so for parents that are listening and trying to figure out, well, how do I teach my children if I don't have the answers? My suggestion rather is to ask the questions that you can send your little ones to school with. Their naivety and propensity to ask all the questions creates a demand in our classrooms for our teachers that they need to figure out where to obtain the professional development. And one way we can do that is to just bring more Indigenous educators into those spaces to answer those questions firsthand. That's not a burden, that's an opportunity because those people are paid and they're seen as the leaders that they are, and that will create a massive change in our schools, and that comes home with us, and that has multi-generational effects. And again, it brings us full circle to the fact that youth will lead us there, and it's their innate curiosity and wonderment with the world and willingness to ask big, bold questions that will give us the space for these answers to emerge. And that's where we have to start, is create that space.
So, okay, I really, really love this quote from the Honorable Marie Sinclair. Innovation isn't always about creating new things. It sometimes involves looking back to our old ways and bringing them forward to this new situation. I thought it was a very telling and profound statement. So I'm curious if you can find examples in your own work or life that could highlight the truism of those words that he spoke. Anything that comes to mind?
I had my one example, which was the midwifery practice, right? Which was really around reclaiming ancestral traditional kind of practices for midwifery and bringing those forward and contemporizing them, right? But yeah, the main piece is that, you know, culture isn't static. No one's culture is static. It's always evolving and changing. Indigenous peoples have always been innovative. The very fact of our existence is evidence that we've always been innovative, pre-contact and since contact. Right? That the fact that we are resilient, the fact that we are still here is because we know how to adapt and change to the environment around us. And it speaks to our understanding of how to look and to watch and to listen and to be in relation with all of our relations, including the land, including the animals, including the, you know, the community and the people around us. And so, I've seen so many new businesses that are looking at how do we take those cultural knowledges, those wisdoms, those teachings. And we're an innovation platform funding. Right now, we have 10 innovators in our portfolio, and every single one of them has found some innovative, creative, unique way to say, this is the ancestral teaching, this is the cultural wisdom that I'm grounded in, and this is how I am bringing it forward to create X, Y, and Z. And, you know, we have 10 projects that are funded across, I think, 8 sectors, if I'm really kind of pulling a few people together, right? But whether it's in, you know, agriculture and food security, you know, in consumer goods, within the finance space, it's taking those wisdoms in really, you know, thoughtful and creative ways, sourcing local, you know, medicines to integrate into their products, using sustainable concepts of the circular economy to integrate that into how to deploy capital for young people and new young, you know, businesses led by young Indigenous women that are also grounded in the, you know, their culture and their teachings. You know, it's a universal theme, but we need to have support to do that, right? And we need to we need to invest and reinvest and increase investments in the innovation space, but doing that in a way that's grounded in Indigenous wisdoms and understands that, you know, going onto the land is not going back to the past.
Yeah,
That's key. That is really key, I think.
Write that down. That's good.
Jace, what would you say? That's great.
I think Murray Sinclair's words are such a guiding post. Innovation, yeah, there's this propensity for like new and more and next season and the next collection and coming summer 2022, more. We're burying ourselves in our own consumption and this desire to see that it's only in the new that we're going to feel full and whole and happy, right? We're seeking joy when we're in those spaces. But to Murray's point, that you don't need to create something new. As an entrepreneurship coach, I spend a lot of time reminding people that it's really easy to say yes. It's much harder to say no. But what we say no to is really where we get to assert our principles and our values and stay focused on what matters most. So it's not launching a spring collection just because you feel you're supposed to. It's not creating a tool that's going to take more people's time into a computer screen and more away from their relationships. So those hard choices of what we won't build and why we won't, submit to a next day delivery culture, that we're willing to wait for good work to emerge and to build relationship with people while they're building that thing that we're seeking. That's the real opportunity. So I think our ancestors know that in spades. And, when we turn to our elders, they tell us those stories about the joy of producing something and it taking time and it emerging and learning. And we shared stories while we do those things. And, the entrepreneurs I see are making things from scratch. They're bootstrapping their projects. They're starting with what they have. And that's where the creativity and the tensions are coming out of, is like, how do I do this without access to an Amazon overnight delivery package, to get some new sewing needles to finish this regalia that I'm going to produce, which I'm actually making because I'm creating a series of how to powwow dance videos so that I can make sure people have access to culture who are outside of community, so there's so many stepping stones that we're willing to walk through. That isn't about creating something more. It's actually just about honoring what we have and celebrating in that and sharing in that. So yeah, it's not about new. It's not about what's next. It's really honoring where we are right here and right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautiful and something that we all can really learn a lot from.
I can't leave this circle without first saying thank you to Sara for recognizing my work and contributions and bringing me into this space. I think that when we're talking about history and we're talking about what gets documented and what gets named and who gets highlighted and what stories get told, that is such a huge opportunity for change right now. And we're actively doing that. And I'm humbled and deeply discomforted to be part of that emergent space. But that is what matriarchs do. We highlight and recognize and support each other. And that's how we exist in relationship, is to tell the stories of others, to create spaces at tables where we haven't had a space, and feel really honored and really in that moment right now, and hold a deep responsibility to do the same for another Indigenous woman and young person. I'm a young person. So a huge chimiigwech to you, Sara, for recognizing and helping me see my own contributions through your eyes, because that really is what matters more to me than my own perceived impacts in this space. And it's your leadership and opening doors for me that have created a lot of those opportunities too. Our works are really synergistic together. So yeah, just a lot of gratitude, really steeped in gratitude.
That's so beautiful. Sara, do you want to respond to that? And actually, as you respond, if you respond, I just want to bring up the last question, because you brought it as what makes you most proud about the young folks, the young Indigenous leaders, and you're obviously providing support for them, and you must be proud of what they're doing and what can we learn from them. I mean, this is the perfect way to sort of segue into that. That's such a beautiful, what you said, Jace, is really lovely. So, Sara?
I mean, so Yeah, thank you. Like Miigwech, that's very touching, and made me feel really old.
Welcome.
Oh, okay. So listen, when I started the midwifery practice as a young entrepreneur, I was also a young person. I was a similar age to you are now, and I was also having a baby, and I was also, buying a house and supporting, my extended family and doing all kinds of crazy things. And I thought, okay, I'll just, I learned how to open a midwifery practice or how to run a midwifery practice from a non-Indigenous person. And this is what you do. And it, some parts of it didn't resonate, but, you went out into the community and said, okay, I'm here. Where's everybody? And it took us a while to get out there, and it was recognizing that you need to go to the old people if you want to get to the young people, especially in pregnancy, right? So I was taught pretty early that, when a young person finds out they're pregnant, they go to their auntie or they go to their granny, and that's where they get their advice from. And so that's who I needed to connect with. So I went and I connected with the elders, and I connected with the community that way. And I think that that's where I got my most powerful lessons in how to do this work in a good way, is for them to bring forward these teachings around it, that it's not them that are necessarily the ones that need to make all of the decisions, right? We often put elders on these pedestals and think of them as these, these all-encompassing kind of wisdom holders, and we're supposed to follow the prescription of the order of the elder. And it was working with some really cool aunties and elders early on who helped me to understand that there's a role for everybody, and everybody has a responsibility. And even children, even infants, have responsibilities. And if we can really understand that everybody and all of our relations, right, have a responsibility that is equal, and that there's no one person or one thing that's more important than the other, then that's where we'll find the right balance. That's where we'll find the innovation. That's where we'll find the success. And that's where we'll find the healing, so that we can go forward into the future, right? Infants have a responsibility to bring joy, right? Their job is to bring us joy. You heard about Cedar Bear. She is fulfilling her responsibility to bring joy to us, to remember that joy is important, that laughter is important. If she is not able to do that, that means that something is out of balance, and she is not able to fulfill her responsibility. And our job as adults is to support making sure that there is balance restored. In the same way, the youth, I think, going forward, are helping us to remember that their role and responsibility is to bring newness, to bring energy, to bring that inspiration, and to bring accountability. And my role is to listen to our elders and bring those wisdoms and teachings forward, but to also bring the youth and to bring their ideas forward. And I'm a bridge. I'm a conduit between different spaces to support all of those things. And I'm continuously awed and inspired, and just humbled by what comes forward from being in relationship with people of all ages and all backgrounds, and really just having humility and love and respect in my heart to make that space for all of those voices to be heard and to amplified, and that it's my responsibility to listen twice as much as I speak. I'm not always good at that, but I think that what young people bring is just such a gift, and that we need to honor that. And Jace, what you bring is such a gift, and the gift that you give to young people that are your peers and also younger than you. You're getting less young than you have an old soul, I would say, as well. But those being able to see you fulfill your responsibilities is my job, but also it brings me joy to see that as well.
That's beautiful. I guess we can end there, even though I can keep going. And you guys, this conversation has touched my heart and just inspiring inspired me so much. Your eloquence and your insight and your intelligence. It, from intellectual, emotional, every perspective, spiritual perspective, I've been moved today very much. And so I really, really appreciate you taking the time to move me and to have this conversation and to share this insight with listeners, with me personally. Yeah, I thank you for that. I really do.